He said it like a CEO announcing a policy. My wife, her mother, and the kids are moving in. No discussion. The way he emphasized those last two words, no discussion, it wasn't anger. It was pride dressed as authority. And his mother, Eleanor, just stood there, holding the same coffee cup she used to pour for him every morning when he was a boy. That house, her house, had raised him, sheltered him, and witnessed every prayer whispered for his success. Now it echoed with silence, not because she was speechless, but because she'd finally realized something. Her silence had raised a man who mistook kindness for weakness. Outside, his shiny black SUV gleamed like a trophy of success. Inside, his words cut deeper than any failure ever could. It wasn't about the extra family moving in. It was about being ordered in her own home by the son she once carried barefoot to the clinic when he had fever. Eleanor smiled faintly. Not the happy kind of smile. The kind you wear when you've already lost the argument long before it started. But here's the irony. He thought he was taking control of the house. He had no idea what was about to fall apart. And it wasn't just the walls of that home. Because pride doesn't just make people blind. It makes them believe they're untouchable, right before life decides to prove them wrong. You want to know how a mother's silence can become the loudest revenge? How the same prayers that built a man can also become the reason he falls? Let's rewind. Before the company, before the mansion, before that cold tone in his voice. Back to when he was just a little boy running barefoot through the backyard, holding his mother's hand, believing she was his whole world. Because this story, it isn't just about a son's arrogance. It's about what happens when success forgets its source and love finds its final limit. So sit back, story lovers. Grab your coffee or tea, because what's coming next will shake your heart. Welcome, story lovers. From where are you watching? Drop your city name in the comments. Let's see how far our story travels. Eleanor wasn't born strong. Life made her that way. She grew up in a small, working-class neighborhood where dreams were something you borrowed but rarely kept. Her father was a postman, her mother a seamstress. They believed in two things, faith and hard work, and Eleanor carried both like armor. She was the kind of girl who believed in small joys. A good book, morning sunlight, the sound of her mother humming in the kitchen. She wanted to become a nurse, not for the money, but because she loved healing. She wanted to help people, to be the calm in their storm. But life had a different syllabus prepared for her. She married young, too young. Her husband, Paul, was charming at first, the kind of man who could light up a room and dim your intuition at the same time. He promised her a world she'd never have to fix. But soon those promises turned into excuses, and excuses into bruises. Not the kind that show on the skin, but the kind that make your heart sore. He'd disappear for days. Then weeks. She'd sit by the window, rocking their baby boy in her arms, pretending she wasn't waiting for someone who had already left. Bills piled up, neighbors whispered. And Eleanor, that once bright, gentle girl, learned how to survive without breaking down. She sold her wedding jewelry to pay rent, skipped meals so her son could eat, sewed clothes for others while her own wardrobe fell apart. She didn't have the luxury of dreams anymore. Her dream was simply to make it to next month. When Paul finally left for good, he didn't even say goodbye, just left a note that said, "You'll manage. You always do." And somehow she did. She took a job as a school secretary during the day and cleaned offices at night. Every dollar mattered. Every minute was borrowed. And every prayer, every single one, was for her little boy, Ethan. Ethan was her reason to breathe. When she tucked him in at night, she'd whisper, "You'll grow up to be something great. Just remember who prayed for you." He was smart, curious, full of questions about everything. Teachers adored him. He'd sit at the table doing homework beside his mom, who was half asleep but smiling through exhaustion. There were times she'd come home too tired to even eat. But when Ethan showed her his report card, straight A's, she'd light up like the sun had returned. "See?" she'd say softly. "We're getting there." But getting there came with a price. The house they lived in wasn't much, Just a small rented home with peeling paint and a leaky roof, but it was full of warmth. She'd fix the roof herself sometimes, using YouTube tutorials and leftover duct tape. She didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. Years went by, one shift after another. The woman who once dreamed of nursing the sick now nursed her own fatigue. And then one day it happened. The kind of miracle mothers never forget. Ethan got a scholarship. Full ride, business school. Eleanor cried so hard that night she couldn't even speak. She just hugged him, whispering, "You did it, baby. You made it out." But deep down, she knew it wasn't just his win. It was every sleepless night, every prayer said in hunger, every tear she wiped away before he could see. He promised he'd never forget where he came from. He said he'd take care of her someday, and he did, at first. After college, Ethan landed a job in a tech company. Within 5 years, he became a manager, then director, then a name people whispered in boardrooms. He bought his mother a house, her dream come true. The same woman who once counted coins at the grocery store now had her own front porch, her own garden, her own name on the deed. But success is a strange thing. It doesn't change people. It reveals them. The boy who once clung to his mother's hand now clung to his phone, always busy, always in a meeting. At first, she didn't mind. "He's working hard," she'd say. "He's building something big." But slowly, the visits grew shorter. The calls came less often. And when he did visit, it wasn't the same boy who used to bring flowers. It was a man with expensive shoes and a tired heart. Then came the wedding. She smiled through it, the proud mother of the groom, but something inside her whispered that she was no longer the center of his world. His new life had a new orbit, and she wasn't in it. Still, she stayed grateful. She didn't want to be a burden. When her son's company went public, he invited everyone but her to the celebration dinner. "It's just business," he said. She stayed home, made herself tea, and watched his speech on her cracked laptop. He thanked his mentors, his team, even his wife's family. But not the woman who had kept the lights on when there was nothing left to sell. That night, Eleanor sat by the window again, the same way she had years ago when her husband left. Only this time it wasn't abandonment she felt. It was realization that she had built a world for her son, and somewhere along the way, she had been erased from it, but she never complained. Mothers rarely do. She still prayed for him every night without fail, even when he stopped visiting, even when he forgot her birthday, even when he called her old-fashioned in front of his wife, because that's what love does. It keeps giving until it quietly runs out. It started with a phone call, a casual one, really, the kind you expect to end in small talk, not life-changing words. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice calm but cold. "We're moving in with you for a while." She laughed softly, assuming it was temporary. "Oh, that's fine, honey. The house could use some life again." But his next words froze her heart. "My wife, her mother, and the kids are moving in." No discussion, no discussion. 2 words that erased decades of sacrifice in seconds. That was the moment Eleanor felt something shift, not outside, but deep within. The boy she had raised on faith and struggle now sounded like the man who once abandoned her. She wanted to say something, anything, but she didn't. Because mothers don't argue when their children think they're helping. Days later, the quiet house turned into a crowded space filled with noise, children running, TV blaring, voices overlapping. At first, Eleanor tried to be accommodating. She cooked, cleaned, smiled. But slowly, her presence became inconvenient. Her daughter-in-law, Madison, started moving things around. First, Eleanor's family photos disappeared from the hallway. Then, her sewing machine was moved to the garage to make space. And finally, her favorite chair was replaced by a more modern one. Her home was transforming, and not in ways she recognized. Madison's mother, a sharp-tongued woman named Gloria, treated Eleanor like a guest in her own house. She'd comment on everything, the way Eleanor cooked, dressed, even how she prayed. One morning, she said with a smirk, "It must be nice having us around. You're not so lonely anymore." Eleanor just smiled. She had no energy to fight people who mistook cruelty for confidence. Ethan was always too busy to notice the tension. He was building his empire, Late nights, constant meetings, endless ambition. And whenever Eleanor tried to talk, he'd respond with one of his favorite phrases. "Mom, please, I'm handling things. Don't worry so much." But she was worried. Not about herself. About him. There was something in his eyes, an exhaustion that went beyond work. She could tell something was wrong, but he'd built a wall around himself made of pride and titles. Then one afternoon, while dusting his office, she noticed something. A thick envelope on his desk marked "Confidential, Urgent." She wasn't snooping. She was just trying to tidy up. But when the corner of the envelope slipped open, she saw enough to make her stomach twist. Unpaid taxes, overdue accounts, and an email printout from an investor withdrawing millions. Her son's company wasn't thriving. It was sinking, and he was too proud to admit it. She sat down quietly on the edge of the bed, clutching that envelope like it was proof of a wound she already felt coming. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her heart ached not for the business, but for the man Ethan had become. He had everything except humility, and now, even that was about to cost him everything else. The next morning, she approached him gently. "Ethan," she said softly, "I saw some papers in your office. Are you okay?" His reaction was instant, defensive, sharp. "Mom, why are you going through my things?" "You have no idea what you're talking about." She didn't argue. She just nodded and said, "I hope you know I'd do anything to help you." He rolled his eyes. "Help me? Mom, you wouldn't understand. This is business, not—" "Whatever world you live in," that cut deep. But Eleanor only smiled faintly and walked away. She could feel it now. The full circle of life. The same tone her husband once used when he dismissed her worries. The same arrogance that came before the fall. Still, she couldn't stop caring. Over the next few weeks, she quietly tried to find ways to help him. She called a retired accountant from her old school who offered advice. She read online about business restructuring and tax forgiveness programs. She was willing to do anything to save him, even if he didn't want saving. Meanwhile, things at home grew worse. Madison's mother began complaining about how crowded the house felt. Madison hinted that maybe Eleanor could spend a few months with friends. And Ethan? He stayed silent. Eleanor realized she had gone from being a mother to being a tenant in her own home, but she also realized something else. Silence could be power. The same quiet endurance that once made her invisible was now her shield. When Gloria mocked her for making old-fashioned soup, Eleanor smiled and served it anyway. When Madison told her, "You wouldn't understand our lifestyle," she just said, "Maybe not. But I understand peace, and you don't seem to have it." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight back. She just watched, because she knew something was about to break, and it wasn't her. Then came the breaking point. Ethan called a family meeting in the living room. He stood there, confident but pale. "I've been offered a merger," he said. "If it goes through, we'll be rich beyond measure." Everyone clapped. Madison, her mother, even the kids. Everyone except Eleanor. She looked at him and asked one quiet question. "And if it doesn't?" He smirked. "Mom, you worry too much." That was the last time she asked. Because 2 weeks later, the deal collapsed. The investors pulled out. The news went public. Ethan Cole, CEO of Cole Dynamics, faces financial fraud investigation. The same people who once praised him now whispered behind his back. His wife blamed him. Her mother mocked him. His so-called friends vanished. And through it all, Eleanor said nothing. She just kept making tea because she knew sometimes life doesn't need your revenge. It delivers its own. Still, deep down, she didn't feel triumph. She felt heartbreak. Because no matter what he had done, he was still her son. And as his empire crumbled, she silently prayed that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally remember the woman who built his foundation. Ruth stood outside the boardroom door, her hands trembling. Not from fear, but from years of silence finally cracking open. The hum of laughter inside reminded her of all the times she'd been invisible, cleaning after their coffee spills, wiping away their arrogance from the glass tables. But today she wasn't here to clean. She was here to confront. Through the glass wall, she saw them, the CFO, the director of operations, and two partners. They were smiling, oblivious. The same men who had dismissed her as the help. She pushed the door open. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Every head turned. One man frowned. "This is a private meeting." Ruth took a slow breath. "You might want to keep it open." Her voice carried something it never had before. Certainty. She stepped forward, pulled a folded napkin from her pocket and placed it on the table. Ink stains bled across it, numbers, dates, accounts. "The missing $4.2 million, she said. "You moved it under development expenses, didn't you?" The CFO's face went pale. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," Ruth replied. "I've known since the night you forgot to close your laptop." A silence heavier than shame filled the room. The CEO leaned forward, his tone now cautious. "Ruth, how did you even—" "I used to be an accountant," she cut in. "Before life got complicated." Her eyes flicked toward the CFO. "But numbers? They never stopped making sense to me." Someone laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. It only made her voice steadier. "I've already sent copies of everything. To the IRS, the media, and your auditors." The CFO slammed his palm on the table. "You can't just—" "Oh, but I can," she said softly. "You see, you taught me something. Silence protects the wrong people." The CEO's expression changed. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a janitor. He was looking at the woman who'd just dismantled their entire empire with a napkin and a truth they couldn't erase. Ruth gathered the papers, turned toward the door, and paused. "I'll let myself out," she said. But before she left, she looked back once more. "That stain on your company's reputation?" she whispered. "You won't be able to clean that up." And with that, she walked out, shoulders straight, head high. The janitor who used to sweep their floors had just swept them out of power. Ruth didn't go back to cleaning floors. When the investigation wrapped, the company offered her a quiet settlement and an apology that came far too late. They wanted her to stay, offering a shiny title and a corner office. She smiled and said, "I've already spent enough years cleaning up other people's messes." Instead, Ruth walked away. For the first time in decades, she wasn't walking toward someone else's dream. She was walking toward her own. She used part of the whistleblower reward to rent a small office downtown, barely bigger than the storage room she once scrubbed. On the window, she hand-painted 3 words: Ruth Carter Consulting. Underneath, in smaller letters, Forensic Financial Solutions. It wasn't much at first. A desk, a second-hand computer, and a heart that had learned how to start again. Word spread faster than she expected. Small businesses, nonprofits, even schools came to her for help uncovering discrepancies in their books. She was good, honest, meticulous, unstoppable. Soon, the same executives who once ignored her were calling her for advice, and she charged them what her silence had once cost her. But Ruth didn't stop there. She started something new, an evening program teaching low-income women basic accounting, financial literacy, and digital tools. She called it Reclaim the Ledger, because to her it was never just about numbers. It was about balance, restoring it in lives, not just spreadsheets. Her small office turned into a movement. Within a year, local papers ran stories about the janitor who exposed the $1 million fraud. Within 2, her training graduates were getting jobs at major firms. Ruth would stand at the back of their graduation ceremonies, never speaking, just smiling through quiet tears. Her son, Daniel, saw it all. The long nights she spent building something out of nothing. The strength she had when life had given her no reason to keep going. He was the one who framed her first business license and hung it beside her old college degree, the one she'd once thought had died with her dreams. Now, every morning, before he left for his university classes, he'd tap that frame and say, "You did it, Mom." And she'd always answer, "No, we did." Ruth no longer counted money to survive. She counted blessings. The quiet peace of knowing she didn't just win, she rebuilt. She didn't buy luxury or show off success. Instead, she bought a small house with a garden where lavender grew wild by the fence. Sometimes, in the golden hour of evening, she'd sit there with a cup of tea and listen to the wind move through the trees. She'd think of the girl she once was, the one who dreamed big and fell hard. And she'd whisper, "You made it." The world still moved fast, and life still threw storms. But Ruth had learned something powerful. The same hands that once wiped other people's tables could build an empire of integrity. When she walked into rooms now, people didn't look past her. They stood up. They listened. Because Ruth Carter was no longer invisible, she was undeniable. Narration outro for YouTube. Thank you for watching. If Ruth's story moved you, give this video a like and subscribe for more true stories of strength, justice, and redemption.